unemployment. The APC will abolish the corruption policy of denying employment to those who are 36 years and above. The APC will protect and guarantee their right to be employed in government. On the 29th of May 2024, vote APC. Vote for Themba Goti to go back to Parliament.
This political election broadcast was brought to you in terms of the CASA regulation governing the election period. The views expressed in this political election broadcast are those of the political party and not of the SABC.
The Talking Point with Cathy Mohlahlana. Weekdays, 9 a.m. till midday.
It's 8 after 10 o'clock. Welcome to the second hour of the show. Coming up in this hour, we'll be taking a look at what is going to be really our final discussion on for Freedom Month. And this is looking at conversations specifically in themes around freedom in this country. And today we're going to be looking at the quality of life and trying to understand, has the quality of life improved for South Africans? In which areas has it improved the most? And how objective or subjective are some of these surveys? And one of our listeners was making the point around what the census tells us, right? The census says, well, life has gotten better for the majority of South Africans. But what do the surveys say? What is considered to be the objective view and what is considered to be perhaps the more subjective view, whether it's good or bad? So that's what our panelists will be unpacking in the next hour. Up next, however, we'll take a couple of your WhatsApp voice notes sent through from the open line.
Let's have the conversation. WhatsApp voice notes on 0614 104 107.
Hey, morning, Cathy. I hope you're having a very beautiful Monday morning. Hey, it is American and Israeli politicians are desperate, Cathy. After the ICC or the news came out that the ICC was preparing to issue a warrant of arrest against Netanyahu and other Senate Israeli leaders, they are now coming out to say they are fast-tracking aid to Gaza. What's that all about, Kate? Well, keep well and have a beautiful day. This is HH in Mpangeni.
Hi, Cathy Mohlahlana and the SAFM listener. In Phosphorus, there's a section of Section 28 whereby the people, they get killed every day by the unknown people. They shoot those people wherever Section in 28, and sometimes they come in just deep into the township. Over the weekend, they kill like another guy. He's just a teacher, a smart guy. They just kill him because he was like accompanied her girlfriend to drop her in 28, and then they just shot him. They just shot those people, and you cannot even arrest them. They are invisible. They're shooting every day, every weekend, and I don't even blame the police there because those people, they are very invisible.
Morning, Cathy. I feel sorry for the journalists. People are so emotional. They are lambasting the journalists because they are desperate so that their parties can win and fill their stomachs. But what about this aging country? People dying like flies, no service delivery, unemployment, children are drowning, pit toilets and bridges while going to school. Thank you, Cathy.
Hi, morning, Cathy, and your team. Flores here from the Western Cape. Cathy, I'm still doubtful who I need to vote for. I have narrowed down 3 parties. And yeah, it's difficult to choose. You don't want to choose with your heart, but with your head. But there's one thing, Cathy, that I think that we need to address. And it's the fact that foreign-owned shops, and I'm not talking just about these Spaza shops from the Somalians or Pakistanis, but also these Chinese. They have micro loan, a small shops, they have liquor shops, they run liquor shops, and these people don't pay taxes. And parties talk about job creation. These are jobs that can be given to South Africans. Yeah, no, this really needs to stop. Have a good show. Bye-bye.
Welcome to the SABC TV License Loyalty Program, where your payment isn't just about paying fees. It's about joining a vibrant community of connected viewers. Ready for the journey? Here's your roadmap. Sign up at sabctvlicenserewards.co.za and unlock an instant reward. You'll get an SMS to confirm your registration. Make a 50% or 100% payment to your account for a payment confirmation SMS and a promotional code. Explore our partners' product catalogs for an array of offerings. Receive an SMS voucher for your favorite outlet as the icing on the cake. Don't wait. Dive into a world of benefits. Register now at sabctvlicenserewards.co.za. T's and C's apply. Remember, TV license fees aren't just payments, they make a difference. The debate of universities will be witnessed on the field of play. The varsity derby between Amatax ladies and UJ ladies. Who are the most intelligent students? This is the Hollywood Bet Super League. Catch the queens of the beautiful game. University of Pretoria ladies versus University of Johannesburg ladies on Sunday 5 May at 2:30 p.m. Live on SABC Sport on DTT Channel 4. Also available on SABC Plus and SABCSport.com. Hashtag We Love It Here. Brought to you by SABC Sport. For the love of the game.
The Talking Point with Cathy Mohlahlana. Weekdays, 9 a.m. till midday.
All right, let's get into our 10 o'clock conversation today, unpacking some of the quality of life surveys that have been conducted. And what we know is that South Africa, of course, when compared with the rest of the continent, still scores significantly higher. But it doesn't mean that within these cities there are not challenges that often get in the way of the ability of citizens to be able to access public goods, economic opportunities, and also just the protection of their social rights. Joining us for this conversation, adjunct professor Alex van der Heever and chair for Social Security Systems Administration and Management Studies at Wits University. Prof. van der Heever, good morning to you. Thanks for your time this morning.
Good morning.
And Dr. Stephen Gordon is a senior researcher specialist in the Developmental Capable and Ethical State Research Division of the Human Sciences Research Council. Dr. Gordon, good morning to you.
Thank you very much.
Prof. van der Heever, perhaps let me begin with you. So we've taken a look at some surveys, and often, it's difficult to get a sense of whether it's fair for one to generalize, so based on maybe what 2 or 3 surveys are saying, or if one is to really just look at each individual survey and dissect it on its own merits and leave it as such. But a question that arises about the quality of life in this country: is it fair for us to look at what multiple surveys are saying and draw some form of, whether it's conclusion or patterns out of those surveys?
Yeah, so there's a lot of information that I'd regard as sort of more reliable and harder, more complete surveys, and you can put the information together and form a reasonable picture of what's going on. So, for instance, the surveys of unemployment and the employment statistics give you one indication of essentially the success of communities, let's say within provinces and the differences, and also the country as a whole. You can look at economic growth, which in itself is not a good indicator, but certainly if the economic growth rates are negative, you can draw reasonable conclusions. You can also look at the information from the sort of income and expenditure surveys and others, which will provide a picture of the levels of inequality, which will give an idea of the levels of social cohesion, essentially provincially and nationally, as well as the indicators of the poverty indicators. So there's several poverty thresholds that are examined, and those differences also give you an idea of just the degree of social stress that households are under around the country. So I think with all of that information, that kind of information, you can build a good picture of what's going on. And in South Africa, that doesn't look very good. And there are very big differences between provinces. And a large part of the sort of the negative trends that we've seen in South Africa have certainly accrued over the last 15 years. And are actually reaching sort of fairly concerning levels overall. So I think that these surveys can tell us quite a lot, and I think the picture they're presenting is not good.
Dr. Gordon, when we talk about quality of life, what are the different markers you believe would go into analyzing whether one has a good or a bad quality of life?
Well, it's a very, very interesting question. And it brings us to a fundamental issue about how we judge the quality of life of an individual. One of the main ways to judge how well a person is doing is simply to ask them. To ask, are you satisfied with your life as a whole? Researchers have been asking that question in South Africa for more than 20 years. This is a question which is a standard way of measuring quality of life in a subjective way, meeting the highest levels of validity as long as your survey meets international standards of representativity. You can really track quality of life over time. Individual human beings are the best judges of how they are doing in terms of their quality of life, because individual human beings can choose what is the most important aspect of that life. Is it safety? Is it financial freedom? Is it health? We know actually quite a lot about subjective quality of life in South Africa, as the HSRC has been studying this issue for more than 20 years. We have acquired more than 20 years of public opinion surveys on this important question, tracking it over time, seeing different provincial variations, understanding how quality of life in South Africa is moved by health, by safety, by financial resources, by exposure to equality. We understand differences between provinces. One of the fantastic things about the academic community in South Africa is that we've really taken this question of how do we measure quality of life seriously, and have produced powerful and unique tools to measure quality of life, not just relying on employment data or GDP per capita, but really delving into the true meaning of what it is to lead a content and happy life.
Dr. Gordon, the fact that much of this information, given the reliance on the individual and what the experience is, it is quite subjective. Is that not a problem, that it is so subjective? I was giving an example earlier and said, well, if I wake up with electricity or with water in the morning, then my quality of life is, if you ask me how my quality of life is likely to be good. But if those services are not there on that particular day that I'm being asked that question, then my quality of life is going to be bad.
So this is a very common reaction to when we first talk about quality of life. So what people will say is that, I myself understand how to judge the quality of my own life, but other people are so varied. In the morning, they are happy. In the evening, they are sad. But actually, human beings need to maintain a certain homeostasis. They need to have stability in how they feel about their lives. If in the morning they feel their life is horrible, and if in the evening they feel their life is wonderful, they are manic. They are swinging between extremes. Most people, if you ask them, are you content with your life? Are you satisfied with how you're going? You ask them on Tuesday, they're going to give you the same answer that they would give you if they asked them on Thursday. Why would they give you a different answer on Thursday than if you ask them on Tuesday? Well, big things can happen between Tuesday and Thursday. House could burn down, they could get married, they could have a child. These are things that really move quality of life. If it's raining on Tuesday, that's not really going to change how you feel about your life as a whole, right? Think about how we judge our lives. Firstly, we judge whether our basic needs are met. This is called hedonic evaluations. Then we judge not about, whether we are warm or fed or have clothing. Then we judge our lives in its societal context. Right? It's called hedonic. Now, Eudaimonic is, is my career as a teacher going well? Do I have the children I want to have? Did I get married and fall in love? Am I judging my life based on the goals that both myself and society have set for me? So, in fact, people are actually remarkably good judges of character, as more than 60 years of quality of life research has shown, not just in South Africa, but in many parts of the world. We must remember the quality of life studies are not a South African thing. There's large quality of life research in Europe, in the United States, in China, and in South Asia. Mass programs of work which show that people are remarkably stable in how they judge the quality of their life, unless something very large happens to them. Again, their house burns down, they get married, someone kills their sister. These really move things. Small things, they don't really move your quality of life.
Alex, let me bring you in here. I wonder if you have anything to contribute on this issue of markers of quality of life before we get down into the specifics.
Well, I think first of all, I think you have to look at the purpose of the data and analysis that you're looking at. So certainly when you look at it from, let's say, a social security perspective, you want to understand the extent to which people have effective agency in society. So it's not only the perception of well-being, it's also whether or not they're realistically in a position to influence their life path successfully, or whether they're effectively just determined by external circumstances largely. So if you, for instance, have an inadequate level of income, your agency is obviously considerably limited. If you're in a household with nobody that's employed or only one person with a very low income job, it's going to hugely constrain the agency of that household. If you're that vulnerable, it means that any social contingency, such as somebody getting ill or becoming disabled, will have a severe effect on that household and will have a long recovery time. So all of those are factors which you would take into account to develop not just a perceptual understanding of well-being, but whether or not people are in a position to actually follow a sustainable life path effectively. And those are the hard indicators that we've got in South Africa that indicate that we've got significant problems with levels of what would be regarded as the ingredients, the contributors to social well-being. So people have unstable incomes. They live in precarious circumstances. They're generally unsafe. They don't have, we don't have effective police services functioning in many areas, but that's not the only aspect of security. So we also have unstable communities, which means that even the levels of social support from within a community can be quite difficult. We've got different communities, some that are more fragmented than others. So all of those things are important contributors which are external to an individual, which impact on their ability to function adequately in life. So a lot of this can depend on both how effective government is functioning, as well as how effectively the economy is functioning. Although these are not the sole determinants of well-being overall, they are ingredients that help create the opportunities for people to do things. But if those things are not working very well, you basically got a position where, objectively speaking, communities have very limited well-being overall.
I'm looking at one of the findings that was conducted by Nambeo, which is also a research entity, and basically they looked at the quality of life in cities across the continent, and some of the markers that they looked at included, purchasing power index, safety, healthcare, cost of living, property price to income ratio, etc. And within that particular index, Pretoria in South Africa ranked as the city with the highest quality of life in the continent, really. And it was followed also closely by Johannesburg. Stephen, when you look at the surveys that you've conducted as the as the Human Sciences Research Council, what do your studies say about the quality of life in this country, and perhaps the cities that would rank more than others, provinces more than others?
No, absolutely. So let's first start out with what is most important to South Africans when they evaluate their quality of life. What measures do they use, right? So we can conduct a study, we can look at different subcomponents of their well-being, and we can identify what those are. So the criteria that people use to determine their quality of life is their perceived standard of living, the financial security, their future financial security, and their feeling part of a community, and their achievements in life. So these are the main criteria that people use to determine whether they are living a good life or not. We've also found some very, very interesting things, obviously. So your exposure to micro levels of inequality will drive down your quality of life. If you feel that your neighbors are doing better than you are likely to have a poor quality of life. Very normal social comparison theory, but it's also very basic things. If you have economic assets, you own things, access to services, access to a good house, access to a car, access to a fridge, you're going to be happier because you have a greater level of material security. Right? These are very, very important. So with that said, we can think about what is the best and part of the country to live in. Right. So if we look at who is the people who are the most unhappy
Stephen,
in South Africa.
Sorry to interject there. I think I'm going to do this. We're approaching 10:30 with our latest news headlines. So what we'll do, we'll take the headlines and then I'll give you an opportunity just to run us through some of those findings of the research. We're, of course, looking at the question of quality of life through the lens of some of the surveys that have been conducted. Adjunct Professor Alex van der Heever, he's with Wits University on the line. Dr. Stephen Gordon is with the Human Sciences Research Council. We'll continue the conversation, and later on we'll also hear from you, right, and perhaps your own perceptions around your quality of life. It's 10:30.
Good morning. In the headlines, Gauteng police are investigating a burglary at the Electoral Commission offices in Houghton, north of Johannesburg. Police say the suspects gained entry by breaking the office doors and only a laptop was reported stolen. Western Cape police say 4 people have been gunned down in the Lloyd informal settlement in Nyanga on the Cape Flats. The bodies of 3 men and a woman were found with gunshot wounds in a shack last night. And the City of Cape Town's Fire and Rescue Service says their crews are still monitoring the fire hotspots on the lower slopes of Constantia Neck and the Kirstenbosch Gardens in the Cape Peninsula. I'll have details on these and other stories at 11.
Taking a look at your markets this morning, the rand is currently trading at 18 rand 80 to the dollar, 23 rand 56 to the pound, and 20 rand 15 to the euro. Markets in Asia ended on a positive note. The JSE mainly higher in mid-morning trade. Markets in Europe are higher this hour. Gold is trading at $2,336. Platinum at $921 per ounce. The price of Brent crude oil is at $86.03 a barrel.
Any person aggrieved by any political advertisement or political election broadcast that is broadcast by SAFM may lodge a complaint within 5 days from broadcast with the Independent Communications Authority of South Africa, ICASA. To lodge your complaint, please contact ICASA's Compliance Department via telephone number on 012-568-3233. That's 012-568-3233. Or email broadcastingcompliance@icasa.org.za. That's broadcastingcompliance@icasa.org.za. Alternatively, complaintsccc@icasa.org.za. That's complaintsccc@icasa.org.za.
The students from Fort Hare University have calculated that only a win will elevate them from the bottom half. Meanwhile, Thunderbirds ladies are in dire need of 3 points to escape from the basement. This is the Hollywood Bet Super League. Catch the queens of the beautiful game, the University of Fort Hare versus Thunderbirds ladies, on Wednesday 1 May at 2:30 p.m. Live on SABC Sport on DTT Channel 4. Also available on SABC Plus and SABCSport.com. Hashtag we love it here. Brought to you by SABC Sport. For the love of the game.
Bridget Masinga on SAFM.
Can we avoid this being a race thing? When we're talking diversity and inclusion and equity, surely we should also be very deliberate about the penetration of particularly black women in these spaces.
We have, if you see in that article, 42% of children live in female-headed households. So women in South Africa play a massive role in looking after children and communities. And of course, then that means that they need the resources to be able to do that. There's a ripple effect in terms of the challenges we are seeing about women's economic advancement and women's advancement in the workplace, and how that affects the development and progress of families and children and so on. So I don't think we need to see it. It's not a race issue. It's actually an issue of this country.
Shireen Mutara, the founding CEO.
You are listening to The Full Circle.
The Saturday Play.
You think you can just come into my life and mess it up and think you will get away with it? Huh. Well, I'm sorry, Puti. You're messing with the wrong girl this time.
Catch me, Lerato Velase, on The Saturday Play.
You've always made a fool of me in front of the whole world.
Oh, I'm calling the police.
Be my guest.
Catch The Saturday Play between 9 and 10 p.m. Only on SAFM.
Call the president if you must.
The Talking Point with Cathy Mohlahlana. Weekdays, 9 a.m. till midday.
All right, we continue the conversation on The Talking Point. We're taking a look at the quality of life. Professor Alex van der Heever with Wits University and Dr. Stephen Gordon with the Human Sciences Research Council are our guests for this hour. So, Stephen, you were just about to run us through some of the findings when it comes to quality of life and what the research also says about different parts of the country.
Yes, thank you very much. So if, out of interest, if you would like to know which countries, which parts of the country have the highest level of life satisfaction, it is Gauteng and Limpopo, interestingly enough. The places with the worst life satisfaction are KwaZulu-Natal, followed by the Eastern Cape. Now, just because a province has high level of life satisfaction doesn't mean this province, of course, is wealthy. Wealth is not the only criteria for life satisfaction. There are many other criteria that go into predicting life satisfaction. Indeed, one thinks about how to formulate policy, how to address interventions. It's often important to think, what is the intervention that's going to make people the most happy, that's going to improve their quality of life, enable them to live a life that's rich and free and prosperous, rather than think purely in economic terms. Indeed, thinking purely economic terms is how we have many of our problems with, for example, inequality, climate change, and a lack of public safety.
I must say, Stephen, I'm quite surprised by that result of Gauteng and Limpopo. And it's also what struck me about some of the other research I referenced earlier, because often people talk about the Western Cape as having quite a high quality of life. And, there's been all of this conversation around the migration to the Western Cape from provinces like Gauteng because of the quality of life.
No, absolutely. And that just goes to show you that while economics is very important, and I want to really stress that one of the main criteria is which people judge their quality of life is by their perceived standard of living. There are other things that we use as human beings to determine whether we're living a good life. And indeed, if we think about some of the challenges that people face in the Western Cape, they face many challenges regarding inequality, regarding crime, living space. So again, while economics is very, very important, right, it's actually the top thing that people use to judge their quality of life is how well their standard of living is. It's not the only thing. Other things can really push this needle. And in terms of the Western Cape, I can tell you that about 46% of Western Cape adults in 2023 said that they were satisfied with life as a whole these days, and about 46%, half, said they were dissatisfied with life as a whole these days. So what this indicates is there's a degree of polarization in the province between people who are satisfied with their lives and people who are unsatisfied. So, for example, when we look at KwaZulu-Natal, right, 60% of people who live in KwaZulu-Natal, 60% of KwaZulu-Natal adults said they were dissatisfied with their life. 29% said they were satisfied with their life. So the numbers in KwaZulu-Natal are much, much starker in terms of dissatisfaction.
What would you say were the key driving factors, particularly for KZN and the Eastern Cape, receiving such low markers of satisfaction?
Well, of course, there are many fundamental indicators we can look here. And indeed, if we think about the history of these provinces over the last 20 years, they've been confronted with a number, not just of economic challenges, which have been quite dire, but of social and political challenges. We must remember that existing data shows us that trust, not just trust in each other, which is unfortunately quite low. We are a low trust society. We do not trust our neighbors. We do not trust people in South Africa in general. Trust is an important determinant of how well we are doing in life, because social capital, social networks are important determinants of how well we perceive our lives. But fundamentally, we must also remember that what people want is they want a government that serves them, that delivers for them. Now, what's happened over the last 15 years is we've seen a massive decline in political trust in South Africa. Particularly in the last 10 years, political trust has fallen substantially. It has fallen alongside people's satisfaction with the status quo. They feel the status quo is no longer tenable. And nowhere is that more true than KwaZulu-Natal, where satisfaction with the status quo is lower than has ever been seen since people started doing public opinion surveys. It's almost amazing how low it is. To be honest, we were surprised it could fall, in fact, that far. People in KZN, they don't trust the national government. They don't feel the country's heading in the right direction. They don't feel the economy is doing well. They feel that the center is not holding. So when we look at life satisfaction, it is both a reflection of how people are doing on the ground individually, but also a reflection of how we feel our community is doing, how we feel our province is doing, how we feel our nation is doing. This is a very important thing. People are not just what they call ergotropic. They don't just care about themselves. They care about the community. They care about their family. They care about the direction that all those things are going in.
Alex, I wonder what happens when we potentially map out findings like what Stephen has just read out to us and sort of put if you're to put the two over, let's say, the findings of the census, would one find uniformity with that kind of data that is perhaps specific to how many houses have running water, how many houses have electricity?
So firstly, I would not rely exclusively on subjective surveys of people's sense of well-being. It's an indicator of something, but it is not an adequate indicator overall. So if we had to look at the relative differences between provinces in terms of the overall statistics, Western Cape, for instance, has the lowest levels of inequality at this point in time. And that's an interesting result. It also has the lowest levels of poverty in terms of as measured against sort of the lower bound poverty rate. So its poverty rate would be 22.6%. Versus, say, Limpopo at 42.8%. That's massive. That's a huge difference. The question is, how is that impacting on people and what's forming their subjective perceptions? In the case of a province like Limpopo, its expanded unemployment rate is 46.7%. That's pretty big. The difference between Gauteng and the Western Cape is its unemployment rate is expanded unemployment rate is 38.4% versus the Western Cape, which is 25.6%. And when you look at the Eastern Cape, it explains some of their subjective indicators in that their expanded unemployment rate is 47.1%, and their overall poverty rates are off the charts at 47.8%. That's the lower bound poverty rate. So these are not very successful provinces at all. And these statistics are important because they're an indicator of government success as well, and whether or not they are performing. Now, obviously, there is a limit to how much that can impact on subjective feelings of well-being. There might be other factors at play. But what it appears is that provinces like the Eastern Cape, Northern Cape, Limpopo and Mpumalanga are extremely poorly performing. KwaZulu-Natal is definitely underperforming massively at the moment and in a state of decline. But Gauteng, which should look broadly the same as the Western Cape, is showing quite a significant difference. But I think that what we're seeing at the moment is really the extent to which we're being successful at creating opportunities for people to improve their own lives. So I think that that's important from a policy perspective. You can't just look at subjective indicators of well-being because in some cases they're picking up something else. At a policy level,
what do you think they're
have to know where you're going wrong.
What do you think they're picking up?
No, for instance, somebody living in a particular, I'll give you where hard statistics might actually give you a problem. So if I had to say, if we had to compare people consuming 1,000 calories, no more than 1,000 calories a day, and you compare two people, you compare Angelina Jolie with somebody in a rural area in Eastern Cape, they could be both consuming 1,000 calories a day, but they're in quite different circumstances compared to each other. So you can't use a hard indicator like that as a measure of social well-being or of a level of capability. But what governments have to look at is, are we putting people in a position that they can follow productive lives, or are we putting them in precarious circumstances where it's difficult for them to actually progress effectively? That's what we want to measure. And if education levels are not performing effectively, if I had to compare basically the levels of government performance across provinces, you find that the levels of corruption, as measured through irregular expenditure, fruitless and wasteful expenditure, etc., measured in particular ways, shows Northern Cape, Eastern Cape to be in dire circumstances as well as Gauteng. Those are also indicators that show a long-term tendency for government to actually respond to a community's developmental requirements, which is putting them in a position to take charge of their lives. But sometimes just measuring people's sense of well-being in a subjective sense is measuring. It's like measuring the ripples on a river, on the sea. You want to see substantially what's impacting on people's lives, and put that into place. But ultimately, the levels of well-being that you have as an individual are pretty much in your own control, subject to the limitations of your overall environment. And so a lot of the indicators look to the overall environment, but they can't really tell what's happening to you personally, because that's really under your own control. But you want to put somebody in control of what of their own well-being. You don't want their levels of well-being to be totally determined by their external circumstances, and place them in a position where they are perpetually in a negative state of social well-being.
Yeah, really fascinating insights from the both of you. Of course, I'll also take your calls on 086 000 2032 on the WhatsApp voice note line 0614 104 107. Justice, you're in Attridgeville. Good morning.
Morning, Cathy. How are you? Listeners and your guest there.
Yes, good morning.
Yes, I would like to do with your guest there on the quality of life and how people measure their standard of living and in relation to the society and the communities in which they are living in. You understand, in terms of the consumption of the intake of food or anything around that we can consume, because consumption can be in many ways. We can consume food, you can consume gadgets, you can consume information, you see. Because when we view consumption, we need to view consumption in all dynamics, not in a one-dimensional level. Consumption is viewed in a multi-dimensional level, you see. So how we view consumption, you see, like in terms of the standard of living, is different from many of the people, you understand me. One can consume information for the rest of their life, you understand, and the other person can consume check maybe like a gadget or electronics or maybe
Justice,
food and all that.
Justice,
Yeah.
sorry to rush you along, but I think if you can get to the crux of your point.
Okay, my point is consumption is different. It's multidimensional. That's my point here. My point here is that consumption is different. It's multidimensional. Yes, it's multidimensional. That's my point there. But yes, to the point of your guest there is that we need to educate the public on how to drop out of the consumer rate. Understand? I think it will help minimize all the sufferings that we see in our daily lives of the people that we are living around with. You understand me? I think awareness and education for the public in general on how to drop out of the consumer race, because consumption or maybe affluence is another form of a slavery of a modern person in terms of the consumption, understand, given the system that we are living under, we understand.
Okay, all right, Justice. We're going to have to leave it there. Thanks for calling in with that view. Brian, you're in Cape Town. Good morning.
Good morning, Cathy, and your guest.
Yes.
Cathy, I think the sound is not very loud on my side. I can barely hear. But anyway, I think your one guest did touch on this point that I wanted to make. I think it's more a subjective view. I agree with Karl Marx. He says, look around you. What do you see? Obscene wealth alongside abject poverty, breakdown of law and order, daily wars between and within nations, and very little sign of improvement. That is a subjective view. What I also want to, I made a slip up about a week ago when I quoted Felix Green on democracy. What he says, for what is called democracy is merely the way in which privilege and exploitation has been entrenched. So, but the long and short of this is that I believe that it is a personal view rather than people giving you their views on the issue. You know?
Okay, all right, Brian. Thanks for that view.
Okay.
Lonwabo, you're in the Eastern Cape. Good morning.
Good morning, Cathy, and good morning to your panels. Actually, for me, I think these are one of those surveys that tell you something and they tell you nothing. I'll just zoom in on the Eastern Cape. The Eastern Cape, though, it's a province on its own, but it's different even the way in the levels of governance. The Eastern Cape, probably similar with KZN, because they are predominantly rural, whilst other provinces would talk of provincial government and the local government. Then in the Eastern Cape, there's also an added layer of chieftainship, that now they control the chiefs in the rural areas. Now, if you go within Eastern Cape, go to the areas such as Gqeberha, which is a city kind of environment, East London, which is a city kind of environment. As soon as you cross now the Kai River towards the east part of the Eastern Cape, it's predominantly rural. So it's going to be difficult to say in the Eastern Cape the quality of life, somebody who stay in the city of Gqeberha and East London. Then now you'd compare it with the quality of life with the person who stay in the rural areas of the eastern part of Eastern Cape. Then now you come with a conclusive or one way of saying, now this is their quality of life. Secondly, you can't compare Eastern Cape with other provinces as for instance, there's no mineral resources in these provinces. Gauteng has got mineral resources, Mpumalanga, and. Now, at what point are you going to say, you can conclusively say, Eastern Cape, their quality of life is less than, whereas other provinces have got other endowments, which naturally we don't have. So all I'm saying is that these kinds of surveys, they tell you something when they tell you nothing.
Okay, Lonwabo, thanks for that view. Percy, you're out in Limpopo. Good morning.
No, thanks very much, Cathy. I think we should acknowledge the survey, which depicts in various areas some shortcomings and improvement. Because if you look really in terms of issues relating to your labor legislations and all of that on its own, it's an achievement. And of course, one must also indicate that it will be proper that instead of speaking negative about trade unionism, in fact, we should be able to say how do we strengthen them so that they become a voice for the workers at a shop floor level. But in the main, one should also speak to issues relating to the comparison and in relation to provinces. And I think we should be able to indicate that, one should be able to indicate that there are many factors that, of course, would then contribute to the performance of provinces. And key to that would be how do you then begin to look at the economics of these provinces before you are able to then categorize them in terms of their standing and in terms of their low standing and all of that, so that the picture that you then depict, it's a reflective of really what is happening in those provinces.
Okay.
And of course, hello?
All right. Percy, we're going to have to leave it there, unfortunately. Okay. Yeah. Dr. Gordon, come in here. So, I mean, is this something you find a lot in terms of just contestation around what surveys are actually saying? And I also wonder, how do we reconcile, especially for a country like South Africa, 30 years on, where you have so many people that say, well, you know, nothing has changed. My life is still the same. Compared to what it was in 1994, when in fact we know that is not necessarily the case. How do we reconcile how people feel and what they feel their reality is versus perhaps what some of the other data may suggest?
Okay, well, thank you very much. Well, firstly, I would just like to say that our government spends a lot of time looking at objective statistics. Indeed, the president recently gave a speech in which he listed off a series of objective statistics about employment, about service delivery, and indeed, government reports are filled with objective statistics of just the type that our dear panelist has listed. What I would say is that when thinking about policy, thinking about government intervention, it doesn't hurt to think about, are people satisfied with their life? One of the goals, not just of government, but of society as a whole, is to produce citizens who are content, who are satisfied with their lives. Human beings are not as stupid as some academics sometimes think they are. If they are content and happy with their lives, that's a real and meaningful thing and something we should strive for. They are not being silly or ignorant or pig-headed if they tell you that they are content with their lives. That's something real and meaningful and is feedback that we should honor and seek to improve on. Now, that being said, let us talk about where we are now in our history. So we are 30 years into democracy and a lot has changed. Vast amounts have changed. We've seen huge change. The idea that nothing has changed, both structurally, from a community, neighborhood, government, economic level, is remarkably silly. There's been a lot of change. Some of this change has not been good. Some of this change has been disappointing. Some of this change has been very good. Right? There has been huge amounts of change. The goal of academics, the goal of scientists, is to understand that change so we can maybe try and improve on things. So it is quite silly to say that nothing has changed. Often what people say when they say that is their expectations for democracy, for constitutionalism, for liberalization, for freedom have not been realized. Right? Particularly on that last one, they feel they do not have the freedom they should have, the agency they should have. And that indeed is behind a lot of the frustration that we often encounter when we go out and we speak to people about their lives and their quality of life.
All right. Thank you for that contribution. Alex, I'll wrap it up with you. You've got just about 2 minutes.
Yeah, so I think it's important to understand the purpose of and the value of information for policymaking, which certainly is my focus. You have to look at what the ingredients are of success in achieving or changing certain social variables positively. And we have quite a lot of those. We do understand the differences. The government rarely acts very effectively on them, but we can definitely see where there's a difference between how government has been performing provincially and nationally. And those statistics show that South Africa is not doing well overall. And we basically need to get our act together and make sure that we get these basic variables to work effectively. Unemployment in South Africa is at unacceptable levels from an international perspective. South Africa's levels of overall inequality are unacceptable. All of these have not been changed. The needle has not been shifted by government. And regardless of what any perceptual survey says, that hard information tells us we've got to do something better and more. And largely why this has occurred in South Africa is because of corrupt governments that have basically not focused on the needs of South Africa. So we have to look at this hard information to make a difference and understand where government is not performing. Failing to do so, then we will accept this failure going forward.
Professor Alex van der Heever and Dr. Stephen Gordon, let me thank you both for your time and your contribution to this question. I guess it still, in many ways, does not settle the question, right? So do we say, has your quality of life improved or hasn't it, right? Because on the one end, you can feel it has, and the data can show that actually it hasn't improved to the extent that you might feel it has. So yeah, really interesting reflections there by our guests. It's 11 o'clock, time for the latest news.
In our top stories, police probe break-in at IEC offices in Johannesburg and a Hamas delegation to discuss Gaza ceasefire talks. Good morning. Gauteng police are investigating a burglary at the Electoral Commission offices in Houghton, north of Johannesburg. Police say the suspects gained entry by breaking the office doors and only a laptop was reported stolen. The incident comes as the IEC prepares to hold one of the hotly contested elections in South Africa's history on the 29th of next month. Police spokesperson Brenda Murudili says they are investigating.
I can confirm that there was a business burglary reported on 28 April 2024 by an employee of the IEC at the Houghton premises. The big break-in was discovered at about 17:45. So far, only a laptop belonging to an administration employee has been reported stolen. The police are investigating a case of business burglary.
In election-related news, Abel Tau of the Forum for Service Delivery believes that South Africa's mines should be nationalised. He says at present the country's mineral wealth is benefiting a few white people. Tau was a panellist during an elections debate on the SABC's Elections 360 programme held at Brits in the Northwest last night. The programme was discussing the role nationalisation of mines could play in helping address South Africa's triple challenges of poverty, unemployment and inequality. He says the country's minerals must benefit the black majority.
The mines must benefit our people, our black people, not the government. Because remember, if the mines are going to benefit by the government, there's going to be a very big corruption, as we know that our country is under a serious corruption. There's a big corruption in South Africa. And we believe that we in South Africa, we can process our raw materials and sell them to other countries rather than they take our raw material and sell it back to us with a serious price. This must stop.
In other news, Western Cape Police say 4 people have been gunned down in the Lloyd informal settlement in Nyanga on the Cape Flats. Police spokesperson Andre Trout says the bodies of 3 men and a woman were found with gunshot wounds in a shack last night. Trout says a 5th victim was wounded and is being treated in hospital.
SAPS have launched an investigation. Police members were summoned to the crime scene in Lloyd informal settlement. Motive for the attack on the victims is yet to be determined, and the suspects are still being sought by detectives attached to the Provincial Serious and Violent Crimes Unit. Any person who can shed light on the matter or who can assist police to apprehend those responsible for the murders and attempted murder is kindly requested to contact Crime Stop on 08600 10111.
The City of Cape Town's Fire and Rescue Service says their crews are still monitoring the fire hotspots on the lower slopes of Constantia Neck and the Kirstenbosch Gardens in the Cape Peninsula. The city's Fire and Rescue spokesperson Jermaine Carlson says the fire has largely been contained. He says an assessment is underway to determine whether aerial support is needed this morning to assist the crews who are on site. And finally, a Hamas delegation is due to attend fresh peace talks in Egypt today, following Israel's latest proposal for a long-sought truce and hostage release deal in Gaza after almost 7 months of war. A senior Hamas official is due to meet mediators from Qatar and Egypt. The BBC's Yolanda Nell reports.
For weeks we've had this impasse in negotiations, and now the mood music is much more positive, and there's a senior Hamas official who's quoted by the AFP news agency saying that they don't have major issues with the latest Israeli proposal. Now the Axios news website in the US is talking about how there is some new wording apparently suggesting something about a restoration of sustainable calm, and saying that's the first time in nearly 7 months of war that we've had Israeli officials ready to talk about an end to the war. Israeli media suggesting this is more of a kind of an attempt to come up with a vaguely worded statement that will appease Hamas.
Recapping the top story, Gauteng police are investigating a burglary at the Electoral Commission offices in Houghton, north of Johannesburg. Police say the suspects gained entry by breaking the office doors and only a laptop was reported stolen. For SAFM News, I am Anne Musa.
Across South Africa, online and on radio. SAFM, let's talk.
Be part of the 17th Annual SA Sport Awards under the theme Celebrating 30 Years of Freedom Through Sporting Excellence, with great prizes to be won every week. All you have to do is SMS A, B, C, D or E to 32020 to vote for your favorite People's Choice Nominee of the Year. SMS is charged at R1.50. Free SMSs do not apply. The nominees are A. Eben Etzebeth, B. Gardestein, C. Siamtanda Siya Kolisi, D. Pansy Tau. E. Kirsten Neuschafer. SMS A, B, C, D, or E to 32020. Voting line closes at 9 p.m. on the 5th of May 2024. T's and C's apply. For more information, visit dsac.gov.za. Catch the SA Sport Awards on Sunday, 5th of May on SABC Sport on DTT Channel 4 and SABC 1 at 8 p.m. Proudly brought to you by the Department of Sport, Arts and Culture. SABC Sport is the official broadcaster of the SA Sport Awards. Hashtag Izinja's Game. Hashtag SASA 17th edition.
Ashraf Garda on SAFM.
A judgment was passed. B, the ANC Secretary General pronounced on that, as you've heard. Firstly, what do you make of what he said?
Malula is a lazy thinker. You know, he's an ambulance chaser. He's clutching at straws. He's trying to articulate laws he doesn't understand. What do you expect? Such is the nature with the incompetence that is rife within the ANC leadership. And the mere fact that, you know, they took on his little project and they actually agreed and supported him speaks volumes of them as leadership in the first place. So these people are not ready to govern.
The MK Party spokesperson, Dlamulo Ndlela.
The National Pulse with Ashraf Garda. Weekdays, 3 to 6 p.m. The Talking Point with Cathy Mohlahlana. Weekdays, 9 a.m. till midday.
Hi, this is Cathy. Sis Cathy, what a nice conversation you guys are having. Kwena here. I think I believe and I know why Limpopo is one of the top two. If you check Limpopo, most of the people, apart from it has a lot of people like more than 3 cultures. Because there is Baluvedu there also. But if you check, most of Limpopoan people, they work for themselves. They take what they have, they make use of it. In most cases, you will check via business, entrepreneurs, anything. They're not just relying only on education. They farm, they open business, they do a lot of things by themselves, and I think that's why they are so comfortable in living in their own land. Kwena.
Good morning, Cathy. How are you, Mafuta? Cathy, I think you must forget about what political parties say or researchers say, because you should ask who are those researchers and what their intentions is. Life since 94, it vastly improved for the many people, Cathy. But one thing lacking, Cathy, South Africans are not coming to the party to take the bull by its horns and work and stand for themselves. They are waiting for the government, unemployment, Cathy, all those social ills we try to cry about, drunkenness, drug abuse, Cathy, they got a bearing on individual's decision. If we all take part to control our lives and not wait for government, life will be much better, Cathy.
Yeah, Mafuta, thanks for that voice note. It also goes back to the point that Professor van der Heever was raising, that often determinants of people's quality of life is precisely on the ability to be able to make decisions that can improve their lives. Because if there are external limitations to that, then it very much affects what the quality of one's life might be. Okay, our final conversation for today, we're looking at the war in Sudan. Nixon Katembo is our Africa specialist at Channel Africa and is going to be unpacking this issue for us. So, Nixon, we seem to go through waves and phases, right, where the war in Sudan is sort of cast to the forefront, and then it continues, but for whatever reason, it just flows back into the background and goes unspoken about, and then we focus on it as if it stops and starts again. But that's not the reality of the conflict, is it? It's never really stopped and started.
Yeah, the war in Sudan started quite sometimes. I mean, from
the beginning of Sudan as a nation state. One look at the engineered coup by Prime Minister Abdallah Khalil, who was Prime Minister in 1956 and then rebelled against the civilian government that was elected in 1958. So you are quite right, and this happened in the context of change of geopolitics around the world. We see major geopolitical changes that are happening in the world today that include the world economy changes, power shift dynamics within a global economic and security architecture. So Sudan is a byproduct of all of this happening, including many other wars on the continent, military coups happening, never-ending war, for instance, in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Now you have Ethiopia, Somalia, and so on. So one can go as much, but for this particular case of Sudan, we have to look at it in many ways.
Yeah. What would you say is the impact of Sudan having had, you touched on it, the highest number of attempted coups than any other African country?
Well, that could not be, I think, correct in the sense that the coup d'etats happen in Sudan. They have happened elsewhere, most in the French former colonies. But for the sake of Sudan, for the moment, you have to look at it in the context of the political shift dynamics that happened towards the 2018-2019 coup that were preceded by sort of a normalization of relations between the United States and Sudan, but also preconditions that were made on Sudan to be accepted in the international community, owing to having been on a list of state spokes of terrorism, and that in a way led to Sudan and Bashir at the time trying to normalize the relations, accepting, for example, the payment of compensation for the bombing in Nairobi and 1998 Nairobi embassy and Sudan, Dar es Salaam as well, which then in some way led to the bankrupting of the state of Sudan. That has never been spoken of, and when you have to look also, those payments can be understood also in a broader context of Sudan's commodity export from outside. From roughly the period of 1956, when the modern Sudan was created, up until towards the 1985, also the financial crisis of the 70s to the early 80s, Sudan was exporting cotton, which was much more bringing currency into that particular country. But when this shift changes with the financial crisis in the 80s, you see changes in that Sudan go through a major debt crisis that lasted from 1980s up until almost the 1983. That is the first aspect. But during this period, what is interesting that Sudan also has become an exporter of oil. But with that oil, it means the agricultural sector, like many other African countries, during the period of the structural adjustment program and the introductions of conditionalities by the World Bank, the agricultural sector suffers. So the oil prop up to be the major currency earning product for Sudan. Going forward, during this period, there is agitation in the south. In the south of Sudan, which in this case, which culminated to the independence of South Sudan. With that, Sudan loses South Sudan owing to the independence of South Sudan secession. And by doing so, it means Sudan will lose oil production from the south. What that means is that Sudan is left as a country on its own. By 2013, you see the protests rising in Khartoum, and therefore the government suppressing them. But meantime, while all this is happening in Sudan, there is a sort of a creation of a set of militias. And those militias, in a way, are created by the government of Bashir to help it control the large swath of the country's side. So that's why you hear the war in Darfur, you hear the war in South Kordofan, you hear in northern Sudan, Abyei regions, after, also the independence of South Sudan. Now, if you put all these together, you understand that by 2018, Sudan could no longer afford subsidizing all these wars and the militias created, but also the current account deficit of the country have gone so low that whereas Sudan was subsidizing oils and food, wheat in this case, to feed its urban populations, it could no longer do so, and therefore the protests emerged in 2018 and 2019.
Let's talk about the current concerns that have been expressed by the United Nations. Its warning about imminent attacks in Sudan's northern Darfur region. And, of course, it's also raised concerns about what... When you read the way it's reported, right, it gives a suggestion that it's a conflict that arose just in the last year between the Sudanese army and the rapid support forces. But again, it must be seen in the context of what is and has been historically quite an unstable and violent country. Beset with conflict.
Certainly what is the UN is raising is nothing new in my view. Because as I paint the picture of how these militia groups develop in the hinterlands of countryside of Sudan, also by the sponsorship of the government in Khartoum, therefore creating a division within the Sudanese society between the urban centers and the rural area, but also creating a situation where people are yearning for access to resources, where the urban centers are more or less spoiled with the wheat bread and the oil subsidies and so on, which is in this case the agricultural sector in the rural Sudan has been alienated, therefore creating a conflict and the tensions between the community, mostly the nomads and those who are doing agriculture for subsistence farming. And therefore the war in Darfur, for example, you hear about the janjaweed just rasking sedentary agricultural people fighting over land, over pasture, and so on. But for UN to come out to say that these are the reports that now is exacerbated, it's indicative of what has been there that has not been dealt with over the years. And for the countries such as Sudan, after creating those militias, then you see that they became part and parcel of the state. Having been part of and parcel of the state, when Bashir is threatened by this protest, which is a unique in a way of a sort of a replica of the Arab Spring, but with a unique Sudanese aspect, because those protests happen in such a way that they started at street committee levels, where people organize among themselves because of the economic conditions that I explained earlier, the lack of government subsidies in terms of oil and the food. But then people start rising up and say, what's going on here?
So in order to effectively address the conflict in Sudan then, what would one need to do? Does it all begin with resolving some of these economic and resource challenges that the country is facing, especially given the high levels of inequality between the urban and the rural centers?
I mean, when you talk about resolving a conflict, you have to look at what the underlying causes. And for me, I don't just talk about conflict. Yes, conflict resolution takes different stages. The stages of silencing the gun is to find a meaningful way for discussions to happen and then paving the way forward. But the question is, what are the underlying causes before you even talk about conflict resolutions? And I said, economic aspect and the state-sponsored militia group and structures within the state, which then sort of hoodwinked the very, very serious issues that led to people to protest. One of which is looking at how the military then came in. After the Sudanese protest that overthrew Omar Hassan al-Bashir, and therefore taking over. And you have to look at the military, it has to look at, if you will let the protesters go amok without our intervention, that means the entire ruling elite is meant to collapse. Much of what happened in Egypt, where you have the Muslim Brotherhood led by the former president Ahmed Morsi, leading so what we know now they call Arab Spring, that overthrew Hosni Mubarak. Eventually, the military intervening, and Al-Sisi taking over power now today, changing the constitution, remaining in power, effectively keeping the military structure in place under Hosni Mubarak, now under Sisi today, and therefore losing the meaning of the Egyptian revolution. Much has happened in Sudan in that way. But then, unfortunately, with the case of Sudan, is that you see now tension rising among former comrades, particularly those who were in the military between RSF and the Sudanese army led by Abdel Fattah al-Burhan. But understanding also that there are international context and the dynamics to it, which we are going to touch on.
We're looking here at a country that is probably facing one of the highest levels of internal displacement as a result of what has been this ongoing conflict. Talk to me about what the impact and implications of that have been for the Sudanese.
One of which, for Sudan and Sudanese in particular, is looking at how the sufferings of the people has exacerbated in a way that now we hear people dying of hunger. We hear millions being displaced in many areas, much of which are led to the economic conditions in the first place of what I described earlier as Sudan over-reliance on oil, but also therefore letting the country's agriculture sector suffer. Much of which has happened in many African economies, including ours here in South Africa, where we're so over-reliant on mineral exports as a major source of our current account deficit or earnings, state earnings in a sense, but forgetting about the agriculture, but also in a context of land acquisitions, land ownership in this country. In Sudan is the case of agricultural machinery going for food production instead of focusing on oil productions, which then has been cut off from Sudan and therefore belonging to the newer state, which is South Sudan in this case. And that created much of the conflict around Sudan, which is now displacing so many people. You have areas like Abyei, areas like North Sudan and South Kordofan regions, Darfur region as well. You hear about fight over land and so on. So these are key issues that you have to look at. That how do you structure a state that is holistic and seek to respond to the economic needs of everyone in the country. In a rural area, you develop agriculture sector that seeks to feed the masses, but in an urban area, you look at what are the service industries in terms of industrialization capital that then drive the economic growth and employ many people as much as it can for the stabilization of the stabilization of the economy. And that has not happened in the case of Sudan. Unfortunately, it did not happen even in the case of our countries, such as Africa, where you see people talking about deindustrialization and so on, statisticians collapse. These are markers of potential social unrest as a way we have seen it in Sudan.
So when we look at the proliferation of militias in Sudan and the extent to which some of these have now also become part of the state apparatus, you of course would also have those militias or even rebel groups that are outside of the state. Does it make the conflict more difficult to deal with? Because on the one hand, yes, there is what would be prescribed in law about what the state can and can't do, but there, of course, is a network that would exist beyond what is the capability of the state when confronted with the warfare.
Certainly, it becomes a challenge, and a blueprint of that. You see how the state of collapsing of state institutions, particularly security sector in a country such as the DRC, where because of militia have taken over certain key strategic areas of the region, of the country, the state then lack total control of what is happening in the entire country. And such is the case of Sudan, where militias now, which have been incorporated into the state institutions under the protection of one man, which in this case of Sudan's former President Bashir, you see that those militias then claim, each militia have a claim on the state resources, on the state capacities, on the state institutions, and the RSF is such a result of these policies of disintegration of state patronage, security patronage within the broader Sudan, and therefore both competing for access for power, access for resources, and the international dynamics come into play now based on which militia or which particular forces leaning on who. For example, the extraction of oil in Sudan was mostly sent to deal by China, for example. The gold that Sudan produces, because Sudan is, I think, the most fourth oil gold exporter on the African continent, much of which going to UAE and many Arab countries such as the Qatar, and this explains why the influence of these Middle Eastern countries over what is happening in Sudan.
We'll continue the conversation with Nixon Katembu. He's an Africa specialist at Channel Africa. We're looking at the unfolding war in Sudan and also concerns that it continues to escalate in different regions of Sudan. Of course, the biggest challenge really being that it doesn't seem that there's any end in sight, and it's causing an incredible amount of suffering for ordinary Sudanese. We're going to take a quick break. We're going to go to the latest news headlines, and then I'm back with Nixon.
For the headlines at 11:30, I am Dino Motaung. Good morning. The Constitutional Court will hear the IEC's urgent appeal against the Electoral Court order which paved the way for former President Jacob Zuma to remain on the Umkhonto weSizwe MK party list on Friday, the 10th of May 2024. In other news, Gauteng police are investigating a burglary that took place yesterday at the Electoral Commission IEC offices in Gauteng, north of Johannesburg, and a Hamas delegation is due to attend fresh peace talks in Egypt today following Israel's latest proposal for a long-sought truce and hostage release deal in Gaza after almost 7 months of war. A full update follows at the top of the hour.
Welcome to the SABC TV License Loyalty Program, where your payment isn't just about paying fees. It's about joining a vibrant community of connected viewers. Ready for the journey? Here's your roadmap. Sign up at sabctvlicenserewards.co.za and unlock an instant reward. You'll get an SMS to confirm your registration. Make a 50% or 100% payment to your account for a payment confirmation SMS and a promotional code. Explore our partners' product catalogs for an array of offerings. Receive an SMS voucher for your favorite outlet as the icing on the cake. Don't wait. Dive into a world of benefits. Register now at sabctvlicenserewards.co.za. T's and C's apply. Remember, TV license fees aren't just payments, they make a difference. SABC Sport is proud to bring you the best polo match on television screens. Watch the South African national polo teams take on the best from around the world. First on the annual fixture is the eagerly awaited international battle at the Nedbank International Polo on Saturday, 11 May 2024 from 1:30 p.m. Watch live on SABC Sport as Argentina, the best of the Americas, face off with South Africa, the best of Africa. Catch the build-up, the international match, and the prize-giving ceremony on SABC Sport on DTT Channel 4. Also available on SABC Plus and SABCSport.com. Proudly brought to you by SABC Sport. For the love of the game.
The Talking Point with Cathy Mohlahlana. Weekdays, 9 a.m. till midday.
We continue the conversation on the Talking Point. We're looking at the escalating war in Sudan and threats now and fears rather that the war could well escalate to the northern region of Darfur and affect a city like Al-Fashir. Nixon, why is Al-Fashir so significant for Sudan right now? And why do we see the international community standing up and speaking out against the potential takeover of Al-Fashir by militia?
I think you have to look at the broader context of the geopolitics that happen in the region. In a way, Al-Fashir being in the north and RSF being formed mostly by former Janjaweed who fought in Darfur, becomes critical to that factor, and much of which has happened in the context of geopolitics in the region, in the sense that prior to the revolution in Sudan, the European Union, including the United States, have to do a process of normalization of relations with Sudan. The EU funded more than 20 million euros to Sudan's Bashir to try to get what they call holding migrants from going further north in the Mediterranean Sea, but also the issue of Libya having fallen and leaving a vacuum in a sense. So if you have this war continuing to such areas like in Darfur, in particular cities like Al-Fashir, where the RSF is much known, then it's going to have a devastating impact on the entire regional context of the area. Remember, these are areas that are bordered with Chad and Libya as well. It have a serious security ramification. That's why the focus is there. But you have to look also at the context of geopolitics and assess that. The RSF is said to have received kind of tacit support from the Russian mercenaries, Wagner Group, in collaboration with those who are in the Central African Republic, something that has angered also the Americans in a sense, but also in a context in which Russia also wanted to build a marine base on the port of Sudan in further north. So if you put all together all these issues in context, having the Americans and the entire Western countries subsidizing, sort of leaving this conflict in Sudan to the Arab countries, which is kind of their proxies in the Middle East. And then you have both countries such as Qatar, the UAE, and Saudi Arabia competing for influence and control of power in this case in Sudan. It leaves much to be desired in the entire political quagmire that Sudan is facing.
Nixon, where is the African Union in this matter? Where are African leaders? Where are the envoys that are flying down or have been flying down? Why does one not get the sense that there has been a continued and sustained effort on the part of the continent and its leaders to have some kind of stability, to have some kind of silencing of the guns? I use that. Where is Agenda 2063 in all of this, Nixon?
It's a very interesting question, but in my simple answer to it is follow the money. Follow the economics dynamics that are happening across the continent. Follow who is funding the African Union and therefore dictating somehow or having influence over its agenda. And that tells you what kind of envoy is going to happen.
No, but you can't talk about influence on its agenda because the African Union is the one that came up with this agenda. Agenda 2063 was, and Sudan, by the way, was one of the key areas that were being looked at under this vision of silencing the guns because, as you said, it's a state that has suffered and struggled with conflict since independence. So why is it that amidst all of these alarm signs that are ringing from the UN and different quarters of the international community, the African Union is where? Silent? What is happening?
Well, the African Union, I think, is silent on the basis of what is, because it is sort of toothless now. And I'm sorry, there are those who disagree with me because of the caliber of leadership that are currently manning the African Union. The context of the Agenda 63 was led by visionary leaders who had at least a sense of what needs to be done, even though there was some level of co-option from Western influence in that sense. You look at former President Thabo Mbeki here, you look at likes of Abdoulaye Wade, you look at Obasanjo of Nigeria, you look at the late Abdelaziz Bouteflika. These are the people who led to the creation of this Agenda 63 that we're talking about. Therefore, the creation of NEPA, the accountability mechanism through the PRM review mechanism, and so on. But if you ask me, are those working now? They're talking to them, by the way. You see former President Thabo Mbeki going here and there to try to see that these institutional frameworks are revived to live up to its true commitment when they first were created. And I guess it's because of the internal political dynamics within the countries on a continent, but also the influence thereof by the kind of leadership that emerges on a continent vis-a-vis the agenda itself that seeks to address African issues. And for me, I think that is lacking on the basis of this vested interest that comes up from the economic side point of view.
All right. I want to take the reflections of some of our listeners on this issue. We're going to play a couple of WhatsApp voice notes before we wrap it up.
Hi, Cathy. Sudan is a very successful, prosperous country. At one stage, it was a center of, culture, it was a center of religion, and it was a center of education. But you see, once oil come in there, then you find that the so-called warmongers get in there because they destabilize the country. They create, different groups, provide arms, and bring about civil war. So this is all because of the resources of the country. To get the resources, they really turn the whole country upside down. So the people will suffer and fight among themselves while they enjoy stealing the oil from Sudan.
Good morning, Cathy. I've just always wondered, why is it that our government seems to have forgotten about the Sudan war? Now they're just concentrating on what is happening, between the Palestinians and Israel. That they hardly ever say anything about it, as if everything is normal. Like I always believe, for me, charity begins at home, and you'd think that would be their priority instead of now putting all their attention to what is happening in the East. Maybe I'm missing something, or I don't understand. Debbie, thanks. Bye.
Cathy Mohlahlana on SAFM.
And perhaps just to build to what Deborah was saying there, is a question really of the region, right? That the regional bodies, are we seeing a greater effort from those regional bodies, from the regional body, in terms of actually trying to intervene where possible and support where possible? Because it can't be, Nixon, that we have conflict that is taking place and is escalating, and the general sense is that it's allowed to get out of control and nobody really has an interest in making sure that the conflict comes to an end.
Well, the regional bodies tend to have influence of what is happening, but it's kind of a leadership that emerges out of those regional bodies. If you look at, for example, the case of Sudan, President Ruto initially earmarked by IGAD to mediate in the conflict between the general. But owing to his statements that he has been making about the military and so on, the military decided that he is not a fit person to mediate into the conflict by IGAD. And that tells you how much a level of mistrust between those who are involved in a particular conflict on a continent vis-a-vis the kind of leadership that seeks to mediate and find a solution to the problem that are suffering. And this is always across the continent. For example, in the case of northern Mozambique and Cabo Delgado, for example, you have a president who mistrusts the SADC, that he run to another country quote-unquote a friendly country, and they have its military from the Central Africa, from the Great Lakes region to come and take over what could have been SADC intervention. So you have to holistically look at what are the key issues and underlying factors that create this mistrust among the leadership and the regional bodies, and finding solutions to some of the conflicts that emerges on our continent. Therefore, I guess there has to be a concerted effort to find out what is the common vision for regional bodies, for the continent in getting out of this political quagmire, particularly with the conflict on our continent.
Nixon, we're going to have to leave it there for this morning. Nixon Katembu is an Africa specialist at Channel Africa. That's where we wrap it up for the show today. Up next is the book reading, The Talking Point. Back with you again tomorrow between 9 and midday.
Join us on Afternoon Express Tuesday at 6 p.m. on S3 as we celebrate Workers' Day. Cathy Mohlahlana shares how to assert yourself at work without being arrogant, and Amy Kleinhans lets us in on how to beat a bad day at the office. And we're making peanut butter balls for that 3 p.m. brain fog. That's Afternoon Express Tuesdays at 6 p.m. Repeat Sundays at 8:30 a.m. only on S3.
It's time to commemorate Izinja's game, the ones with greatness beyond limits and boundaries. The incredible class on the field, court, ring, bench, and boardroom. This is the 17th Annual SA Sport Awards, celebrating 30 years of freedom through sporting excellence. Experience the SA Sport Awards on Sunday, 5 May on SABC Sport on DTT Channel 4 and SABC 1 at 8 p.m. Proudly brought to you by the Department of Sport, Arts and Culture. SABC Sport is the official broadcaster of the SA Sport Awards. Hashtag Izinja's game. Hashtag SASA 17th edition. For the love of the game.
The book reading. Please note the views expressed in this book are not that of the station. Listeners' discretion is advised. SFM presents another episode of Why Men Hate Women, written by Kopano Ratili.
Chapter 25. Is the lesbian an alibi of an untenable model of masculinity? I had just received the book about Sanele Muholi's exhibition at the Tate Modern Gallery in London. I was reminded that while violence against lesbians is commonplace, it seemed that as a country we could not fully process the horror of it. It may be that we did not want to confront the fullness of the terror to which lesbians have been subjected. Has the horror gone away? I do not know. Actually, I do not think it has. Why have there been so many sexually and physically violent acts against lesbians over the years? I do not know. However, I have sought to understand the terroristic violence perpetrated by men against lesbians. I've written about the killing of Zoliswa Nkonyana in 2006 and the conviction of 4 men for her murder. In 2008, former Banyana star Yudi Simelane was murdered, and 2 men, Temba Mvubu and Tato Mpiti, were sentenced to life imprisonment and 32 years, respectively, for the murder. In 2011, 24-year-old Nonkolo Nogwaza, a member of the Ekurhuleni Pride Organizing Committee, was raped, then stoned and stabbed to death. Reports are that on the evening of her rape and murder, she had been with a friend at a bar, and a group of men had an argument with her and friends of hers. In 2019, 25-year-old Portia Simpiwe Mtsweni was murdered and mutilated in Tuefontein, Mpumalanga. In 2020, Liabona Mabishi, aged 16 from Kanini, Stellenbosch, was stabbed to death. On and on, so much death and other forms of violence against lesbians. As far as I'm aware, many of these cases in which lesbians are raped or murdered are never resolved, with no arrest made or prosecution pursued. Once again, I think social inequality between women and men contributed to this violence. Men's violence against lesbians is misogynistic violence and sexualized violence. There are links between the two, and one might say sexualized violence is misogyny. There are other drivers of the rape and murder of lesbians, though, including support for the use of violence as means to resolve issues attitudes towards black lives, attitudes towards women as a whole, attitudes towards different sexualities, economic inequality and poverty as an intertwined pair of factors, alcohol and other drugs, mental health issues, the weakness of the criminal justice system, and the dominant psychology of men. Regarding this last factor, it would seem that visible lesbian sexualities are seen by some men as challenging the prevailing heteropatriarchal norms of masculinity and femininity, and the perpetrators perceive loss of their power as individual men, whether that perception is correct or not. The figure of the lesbian is thus of central significance when we seek to understand the violence of individual men against women generally, and in particular against women who do not sexually love men. In that way, the figure of the lesbian may help us to comprehend the undoing of ascendant heteropatriarchal masculinity. That is, it helps us understand the unmaking of the dominant straightness of some men. The lesbian is, in other words, an alibi for a masculinity under perceived threat. She is a subject who arouses or rather multiplies feelings of psychosocial insecurity in the dominant form of a masculinity to which some men subscribe. I did not always understand what the fact that a woman loves another woman has to do with my masculinity. I do now. It is knowledge that can be of use to every man. We all men, particularly those who are heterosexual, need to be among lesbians to listen to them, to understand the terror which men like us have caused them. To be among lesbians, to listen to the life stories of lesbian women, to do more than just not kill them, is to begin to open ourselves to learning how to unmake masculinity, a masculinity that is obviously untenable, and therefore to begin the work of remaking men. For the rest of us, such as mothers of boys, heterosexual women, and persons of other genders who are desirous of making their masculinities, the least we can do is leave lesbians to enjoy the freedoms all of us are promised in the Constitution. Chapter 26. Will we reduce rates of rape of women and children when we cannot face present rape? From my pre-teen years till my early 20s, I grew up in a poor, rough, violent neighborhood. I grew up with many unmet basic needs, but also so many fears. One fear that haunted my mind was being knifed and dying violently. I will never forget Herman, an older boy who used to bully me and whom I wished dead, actually dying in front of me and the other boys in the neighborhood. That evening, Herman had been bullying me. He would taunt and push me and run around the block laughing. The next time he appeared around the corner, he was staggering towards us, holding his chest. He flopped down next to us. Walking nonchalantly behind him were a couple of guys, Ditsotsi, as we called guys like that. I may be wrong, memory's a devil, but I recall one of these Gebengus not even hiding the knife he had in his hand. They just walked past us, daring us to do anything. Herman was on the ground, struggling to breathe. Blood was spurting from his stab wound. The ambulance arrived too late. I don't know if the murderers were ever arrested. Violence and death had always been part of our lives. For some people, our lives did not matter as much as the lives of white people in nearby Germiston or Alberton. Another fear I had was being arrested and ending up in jail. It was not as if I was a fearsome tsotsi or the hardened member of a gang. I did carry a knife at some point in grade 7, what was referred to at the time as Standard 5, when I was new in the